Coming to you from the Black Swan Media Studios, this is Fireside Chats, talking to the real difference makers in the world. Now, here is your host, John Crump.
Happy Saturday, unless that's Friday, but it's Saturday to everyone out there in YouTube, DLive, Facebook, Periscope, wherever you're joining us. I just want to say happy Saturday, and I hope your weekend is going good. Sorry we are a little late. I had an issue. I thought my server died again after I just had it rebuilt, but it wasn't that. It was actually my big ass feet taking a wire, which pulled the USB out just a tad, but it's all good. It's all good. Tonight, I am joined by a guy I just read an article on. His name is Rob Pincus. He runs ice training, and he just held a training class in New York City. But before we get into that, or right outside New York City, but before we get into that, let me just say we are sponsored by X-Tech Tactical. X-Tech Tactical is a great company. I use them almost exclusively in my AKs, and I do a lot of the parts of my AR belts. Anybody who's a sponsor of this channel is something that I have to use. I don't take on sponsors for products I don't use. X-Tech is one of those, and they've been a long time sponsor. I just want to thank them, and I want to thank all my Patreons out there. Everyone who is my Patreon, thank you. You make this possible. But let me get into my guest tonight. My guest tonight is Rob Pincus, as I said, from Ice Training, and he held a training class right outside New York City, at one of the closest ranges to New York. Now, that is significant because Governor Cuomo has a stay-at-home order, and that stay-at-home order shuts down basically all gun ranges, kind of like what's going on in Virginia. And one of the reasons why I am suing the governor of Virginia to get all the ranges reopened. My case is being heard on June 8th, but the range up in New York shows some great courage by having Rob and on site and led the training class, a modified training class with COVID-19 protections. I'm going to get into why he did the training class, his civil disobedience, also his modifications that he did. Without further ado, Rob Pincus, how are you doing, Rob?
Man, I'm doing great. I really appreciate you fighting through the technical issues and obviously inviting me on. I want to say the write-up that you did published over at AmmoLand, I've shared that with a lot of people, obviously including the people that were involved. Everybody thought it was a great write-up, and I appreciate the work you do to educate people inside of the community and about the Second Amendment community. And it's great to be here with you tonight.
Yeah. So let's get back to talking about the training class, or get into talking about the training class. You held a training class in New York, close to New York City, right? No, is that
yeah. So Pioneer Shooting Center, as I always refer to it, as the closest range that I can teach at in regard to New York City. It's just north of the city proper. It's in a small community called Mount Vernon. If people know where White Plains is or Yonkers, it's kind of in that area. I stay in Manhattan, and it takes me 15 minutes to get up there. Go up the West Side Highway and kind of skirt by the George Washington Bridge, take another bridge, go up 87, and it drops you off right there. It's for people that are familiar with the city. New York City is incredibly complicated to own a firearm, and to use a firearm is next to impossible. There's one range that I believe called West Side, and it just started a GoFundMe to try to remain open inside the city. But it's almost impossible for people from outside of New York City proper to legally participate in any kind of shooting activities or train there. So I've been using Pioneer Shooting Center since it was refurbished about 5 years ago as my home base, I guess, in the New York City area. I really love the city. I've always enjoyed the city, and socially, recreationally, vacationally, spending a lot of time there for shows and restaurants and shopping and all that. Everything that Manhattan's great for. Done a lot of business there with television or books or whatever. But it's very hard to run my firearms training company there, and Pioneer has been a great partner. So when I decided I wanted to reopen my training business and start doing in-person classes again for the first time since February, it made all the sense in the world to reach out to them and see if they wanted to be that first place to reopen, given their location and the restrictions the government had in place.
When did you decide you wanted to start teaching training classes again?
It was really just, well, let me back up. I canceled the entire spring and summer training tour in early March. I was teaching in Europe in late February. We had some students that were scheduled to attend a course in Switzerland during the last week in February that were from northern Italy, just outside of Milan. And obviously at that point, we already knew that things were really going to be bad and already were bad in some parts of northern Italy and Milan. And therefore, we didn't allow those students to come up. One of them was super cool with it, like, no, I get it. I don't want to come up there right now anyway. The other one was a little bit more like, hey, it's not that big a deal. I'm clean. And the host of the class actually was the one that really raised my awareness of just how serious this situation was, because I had been very casual about the whole coronavirus thing up until that week. So I taught the courses in Switzerland. That same week, IWA, the IWA show, which is known as, the European SHOT Show, was canceled. That was scheduled for 2 weeks later in Germany. I went on to do some business I had to do in the Czech Republic and ended up flying home. By the time I got back with a connection through New York City, March 2nd, it was obvious that New York City was already taking the coronavirus very seriously, and things weren't going to be normal for at least the short term. So by the time I got back into Colorado, where I am now, and then back to my Eastern headquarters in Florida, the second week in March, I canceled the entire spring and summer training tour. It became very obvious that I wasn't going to be able to promise the sponsors or the hosts or Personal Defense Network or anybody else anything. All bets were off. We didn't know what was going to happen. So I canceled all of the training. By mid-April, by late April, I would say, it became obvious that things were much more predictable. We had a much better grasp on what was going on, and I felt like we were at least going to be able to run outdoor training in June, and I had planned on starting my training classes back up in June, and that's basically what I'm going to do. I'm going to start putting regularly scheduled training around the country for various locations in June, July, and continue. I have courses for the fall schedule that are already there, but I really wanted to reopen in a significant way, and it's probably important to note that I was pushing a concept called responsible rebellion all the way since early April, whether it was gun related or not, the idea that people need to move forward and they need to find ways to open their businesses and get back to living responsibly, mitigating the risks of virus transmission, but not waiting for the government to give us permission or give us guidelines, because the government has so incredibly fumbled the entire response.
Now, do you think that the government overstepped their bounds when it comes to the restrictions they've put on?
I think some places they have. I chalk this up to mismanagement far more than I do malicious intent. Are there people now that don't want to relinquish power that they've seized? Absolutely. There are governors, there are local law enforcement, there's local mayors. For the most part, though, the tide is definitely turning. We're seeing a pivot to where the courts and especially the law enforcement agencies are refusing to enforce these, mandates from the governors and mayors that I do believe have overstepped their bounds. Unfortunately, what I think has happened is because of the being overwhelmed, right? All of the unknowns, which I grant the government a lot of leeway at every level in February and March because of the unknowns. But once the decision was made to start flattening the curve or locking down or what is physical distancing, all of that, stay-at-home orders. In hindsight, it would have been way better to just say, you've got 48 hours to supply your house. You're going to stay at home for 2 weeks and do it. And then let the chips fall where they may from that point. And then after that 2 weeks, by then implement things like we're seeing now. the physical distancing, the masks, the sanitation issues, hygiene issues, reduced capacity inside of businesses, curbside delivery, stay at home, work from home, telecommuting, telemedicine, all of the things that we're seeing put in place now, all of that should have been done much faster, and it should have been done much more decisively. But, at various levels of the government in various parts of the country, that would have been unpopular, and it just didn't happen that way. So I think now what you've got some governors and mayors who are digging their heels in, sort of trying to defend the fumbling as if it was okay. And now they don't want to relinquish power, because to relinquish the power they've seized would be to admit they were wrong. And that's really cumbersome to the American psyche right now.
G-Web says that training should be a lot easier now that criminals are required to stand 6 feet away from the victims, by the way.
G-Web, so it's funny, I've made a lot of comments. I've taught it and I've participated in these classes in the past. The whole idea of, like, when someone comes near you and you're in a parking lot or you're at the gas pump or whatever, and somebody, you're supposed to put your hands up and say, "Can I help you, sir?" When they're like 10 feet away. No human being on earth ever does that, except in those classes, where you're supposed to keep someone from coming into your personal space. It's kind of a joke. It's like the color codes of awareness. Like, nobody lives like that. Nobody stands at a gas pump and throws their hands up when someone's walking within 10 feet of their car. But now all of a sudden, like, people staying at least 6 feet away is the new normal. So in that regard, I guess there's a lot of people that like their bubble and think their bubble is going to keep them safe, that I'm sure are very happy. They now can live that life that they've lived only in parking lots and classrooms before, where they get antsy if somebody comes within 6 feet of them.
Yeah, I think training is right now very critical and essential, because there is a lot of new gun owners who've never owned a gun before, and now they're armed, and they're not properly trained.
Yeah, I don't even know if they're armed. They own guns. I always say that being armed is a state of mind. It's a way of life. It's not about a tool. So if somebody goes out and buys a gun as a magic talisman against evil, they're not armed. They're equipped. Maybe I'll give them that. But armed includes the capability to use it well and the forethought for how to use it and when to use it. So the type of person, I've been a little bit like jaded and curmudgeon, like cynical guy on the whole new gun owners thing. First of all, I think the number of new gun owners that are truly new has been way overplayed by our side. I've traveled all over the country consistently. I did spend one 26-hour period in this apartment without any visitors, without my daughter here. So that was my one quarantine day, I guess. But I've been all over the place. I have a lot of friends that run gun shops. Obviously, a lot of my hosts that host classes are also gun shops. And, maybe 25 to 35% of the gun purchases that were record gun purchases in March and April and May were truly new. And that's great. I mean, believe me, I welcome them. I welcome the tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands over the course of the last 3 months, new gun owners. But the idea that somebody who's going out to panic buy a gun because of a viral pandemic, that person's not interested in training. That person's not interested in coming to a class. They're not interested in watching Personal Defense Network videos unless we, as a gun community, and unless the person who sold them the gun as a responsible firearms owner or firearms dealer or firearms shop employee, really push that and encourage that, this person's panic buying. And it's up to us over the next few years, to encourage them to be part of the gun community and become educated. I've gone through a bunch of these cycles, all the way back to the 1994 assault weapons ban. I remember people coming to me in 94, 95, 96 when I was just teaching in my backyard range in Tennessee, like, "Oh yeah, I bought this gun because I wasn't going to be able to buy one." And they show up with an SKS or an AR or something, no idea how to use it. And this is a year, 2, 3 years later. And we saw it with 9/11. We saw it after Sandy Hook. And I'm sure that those of us in the training industry are going to see it over the next few years. There's going to be people that show up to classes 2 years from now who say, "I bought a gun when the virus was going on, and then I just kind of never did anything with it. I've always been meaning to take a class. I'm finally here to take a class, and I'm excited about it." And that's great. Like, but the sooner the better. And the way we do that is by setting the example, by making it known that if you bought a gun, you aren't armed, you might get lucky and be able to use it to defend yourself. You're armed properly when you come and take some classes and you get some practice.
Good point there. I'm just looking forward to secondhand guns that have never been fired.
Yeah, really. Yeah, it's out there. And it's not like me. I've probably got a few guns in the safe that I've never fired, but it's one of 150 or 200, right? I'm talking about the guy that got one gun and he's never fired.
Well, that's the one I'm hoping to buy from.
Yeah, right.
For cheap. Yeah, do you think some of the governors have been using this as an excuse to crack down on people's Second Amendment rights? Or do you think that the media a lot, not in our side of the media a lot, but I'm not sure myself.
I would almost across the board, unless there's something I don't know about, I'm going to say no. And here's why I say that. Newsom, who's your guy in Virginia?
That would be Governor Blackface.
Yeah,
Ralph Northam.
Northam. Newsom is California, right? Because they're Northam. So this guy, he's been anti-gun and pro-gun control all along. So the fact that you don't see, he didn't send the state police to confiscate guns. Like he didn't pull a New Orleans after Katrina. You know what I mean? Like he could have gone completely off the wall, and he didn't. And probably because of the huge turnout that happened in January and all the Second Amendment sanctuary cities and counties in Virginia, like I think he was put in check this winter, and he didn't try to double down. Now is he being friendly to guns and friendly to gun shops? Absolutely not. I think was it South Side? Is that the Safe Side? South Side won a quarter.
Down in Lynchburg, Virginia.
Lynchburg, yeah, they won a lawsuit against him, and so my impression of what's going on there is that he's not doubling down or tripling down at all, but he also wasn't going to be super friendly. And then I look at like Colorado, Governor Polis, Democrat, not known for being pro-gun at all. He actually put out a mandate that expiring concealed carry permits be given an extension. And some of the counties, even one of the counties that are close by, led by Republicans, fought him on it. I mean, so, and then obviously Illinois, we all know the story of Illinois, was one of the first states to declare firearms essential to the safety and security of the citizens. And that was under obviously a Democratic governor in a very anti-gun or pro-gun control state. So I have to say, no, I really don't think governors have explicitly come after the Second Amendment. The one example that people will throw out in the last couple of weeks is Michigan. Well, we brought that on ourselves, right? If I'm going to claim we as a homogenous gun community, these guys that showed up and acted like jerks, open carrying with rifles and plate carriers and militia uniforms and everything else, they created a situation where they considered banning guns from the Capitol grounds, which is what happened in Virginia in January. And then they chose not to. They didn't, the governor and the commission and the legislature did not push that. And now I'm seeing people claim that as a victory. And it's like, well, you created the situation that you won. And I'm not sure we can count that as a Second Amendment victory in Michigan. So no, I don't think governors have gone out of their way to single out the Second Amendment. What they have encroached upon and where they've overstepped is in general individual rights and freedoms and civil liberties, whether it's First Amendment, Second Amendment, our right to travel, search and seizure in some ways, our right to live and to pursue happiness, right? Our pure liberty. That's what's being infringed upon now. And that's, a lot of people ask me why I've suddenly decided civil disobedience is the way to go, when I've really never preached that inside of the Second Amendment fight. And the reason is, this is new. This is all of our civil liberties being attacked. Whereas we can argue that in my time in the fight, the last 30 years, we've overwhelmingly been gaining ground in the Second Amendment, on the Second Amendment fight, with McDonald, with Heller, with shall issue, and now constitutional carry waves across the country. I think it's really easy to argue that we've been winning in a lot of ways, and that the civil disobedience thing is not where we should be with the guns. But with our ability to open our businesses, with our ability to take our kids to the playground, yeah, it's definitely time to be responsibly civil disobedient.
One of the things that scares me about this whole coronavirus type thing is people's willingness to give up liberty. I was talking to someone today, and they said Virginia was talking about, well, if people won't quarantine, maybe we should force them to quarantine and put them into quarantine buildings or whatever. Right. And to me, that is very scary. And they're law enforcement too, or retired law enforcement. And their answer was, well, this is a special circumstance. And my response to that was, I don't see a corona clause in the Constitution.
Right.
You have these liberties unless there's an outbreak.
It's tricky, right? I think that the duty of the government, really the federal government, the ultimate worst case scenario, where should you be the most powerful as a federal government, I believe, is in protecting our country from outside. Can you argue that the virus is an assault on our citizenry from the outside? I'm not trying to get political with China. I just mean it's not our crops failing, right? This is something, and maybe it is like our crops, maybe it is nature against us. The point being, if there's an attack that isn't ideological, I'm not talking about civil war, I'm not talking about states' rights, I'm not talking about individual liberties, I'm talking about something that affects all of the citizenry equally from outside of the doing of the citizenry, right? Whether that's an attack, a foreign invasion, or a natural disaster, to include a pandemic, I think that's the number one calling of the federal government, is to use the resources of our country to protect our country. So the idea that Trump has sort of like tried to back away from that and say, well, each state handle it individually, it's a little bit of a cop out, and it's sort of par for the course for Trump. I mean, if he makes a decision here and if he acts unilaterally, which he loves to pretend he can do, if he actually did that, then he'd be accountable for the results. And what he's done here over especially the last month or two is back off from any accountability and push this off onto the governors. So when I look around and I see the situation that you're talking about, this quarantine situation, when I see people saying, lockdown, when I see people defining essential arbitrarily in different counties and different cities and different states, that's very troublesome, because we're a global society. So when you have one mayor who wants to say it's one thing, and one governor who wants to say it's another thing, and the next governor who wants to say it's another thing, people look around and they say, well, and let's look at like the obvious, right? Why can Walmart sell comic books, but I can't go to the comic book store owned by the mom and pop shop local business guy? That doesn't make any sense to me. Why can I get my haircut here, but 3 miles away in another state, I can't get my haircut? That makes no sense to me, because the virus doesn't care about that 3 miles. The virus doesn't care if I'm in Walmart or if I'm in the comic book shop. So to your buddy, I would say, first of all, what do you mean by quarantine? Because if by quarantine you mean stay at home so you don't get a disease, that's not quarantine. If by quarantine you mean you've been diagnosed with a disease and we want to lock you up or keep you away from other people so you don't infect them for a time period that is defined, that's entirely different. And there are many precedents in our culture and in our government and in our society, in our history, of quarantining people who have disease. But that's never what this was, right? All along, this has been everybody stay home, everybody physically distance, everybody wear a face cover, so that you hopefully don't get the disease and or don't transfer the disease to other people. And that's an entirely different thing. And I think that word quarantine needs to be well defined before we even have the conversation. So are there people out there that would agree with your buddy, even if what that means is stay home so you don't get the disease? Of course. I say to them, you're missing out on something. and I've said this a lot in the last few weeks, especially after being in New York, the clause or the phrase life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I've asked people, what's the most important word there? And I've gotten a lot of different answers, and a lot of people have said life. Like ultimately, if you're not alive, you can't have liberty, you can't exercise liberty, and you can't pursue happiness. And I get that. But I think the most important word in that clause, in that sentence, in that phrase is and. Because it's not or. And a lot of people are choosing life and safety far over. They're willing to surrender their liberty and give up happiness or the pursuit of happiness for some unknown time period just to merely stay alive. And that's putting it extreme, because the chances of you actually dying from this virus are incredibly low for the like 99.9% of the population. So the idea that you choose life, i.e. safety and preservation of life, and give up almost entirely on liberty and the pursuit of happiness makes no sense to me. We need to be doing all three. We need a balance, and that's what's been missing.
One of the things you brought up like mandatory mask laws. They'll enact mandatory mask laws. What scares me about that is in the state of Virginia, for example, it's a class 4 felony to wear a mask while carrying a firearm.
Yeah, but I've read every statute that I can find on that. There's always an exception for medical or for emergency services. There's almost always a clause or a phrase in there that talks about with the intent to conceal one's identity. And I'm completely unaware of any jurisdiction trying to enforce the interpretation that a lot of people in the gun community have thrown out there. I just think it's fear-mongering. It's a distraction. Every person, I'll ask you too, every single person that's brought that up to me, I've asked a very simple question. Have you reached out to your local police or the Attorney General's office in your state or your Commonwealth to find out how they're interpreting that law? Because I know Georgia explicitly said they are not enforcing that law in regard to coronavirus masks or face covers, and I believe other states have, and it's very simple. We don't have to sit in the corner and hypothesize this. They're going to use it against us. Just ask them, because they'll either say yes or no in writing, and we'll move on from there.
I have in Virginia, and the answer I got back was we can't comment on that right now.
Yeah, and I think that's what you're going to get. There's no court. I looking at the way the courts have been responding, almost every court has been overturning restrictions. I am infinitely more worried about everything else, I think, rather than saying someone's going to, get arrested for legally carrying, except they were wearing a face cover that the government said you have to wear. That's some fear-mongering, like conspiracy theory, crazy talk. That's not going to be that's not what you need to worry about here.
Yeah. Getting off the topic of firearms into other topics. One of the things that is really weird where I live at in Northern Virginia is our outlet mall was allowed to open up this weekend. But all the churches are still mandatorily closed. And not only that, but like the local stores are also mandated to close. But the outlet mall, which is it's a big Tanger Outlets, which is a big chain of outlets across the country, is allowed to open. Do you think it's fair that they're allowed to open, and not only that, but like big box stores are allowed to open, but these little mom and pop shops aren't allowed to open? Do you think that's fair?
Absolutely not. I think, here's the deal. Like the nature of a business or the nature of an activity dictates its viability or the tenability of reopening it while you're concerned about the transmission of a very contagious virus. So if somebody says, is it fair that the arcade and the theater aren't allowed to open, but the bowling alley and the Top Golf, the golf, outdoor golf thing is? I would say, okay, at least there's some logic here. I understand why the place where everybody takes turns touching things and breathing on the thing right over the things they're touching, and the place where everybody sits in close quarters, breathing all over each other, and potentially laughing and or screaming. It's a horror movie, like it for 2 to 3 hours at a time. I understand why those are being treated differently than the place where you can sanitize the golf clubs, and then a small group uses them in an open air environment for a period of time, and then they leave and you sanitize them again and the next group comes. Or if you look at the bowling alley, right? So if you said to me the bowling alley is going to open, but they're only opening every other lane, and there's hand sanitizer, and obviously the balls get cleaned, and every time somebody takes them, there's not a communal rack like there normally is, like all that, then I get why there's a difference. So if you ask me, like a theater and a church, like the whole basis of that is people in close quarters congregating, sitting next to each other for an extended period of time, and distance and duration of exposure is hugely important to the likelihood of transmission from one person to another. So I understand how sometimes these places are treated differently. Now, the difference between a store in the outlet mall and a store in the strip mall, or a standalone mom and pop shop on Main Street, there's no difference whatsoever. So this is where the unfairness comes is, and I've said this, and I get that I could catch some flack. I expose myself as like a, like a social class, like judgy person or something, like, but the point being, I think everybody gets what I mean. If the bagger at the grocery store and the attendant at the drive-thru can be trusted to protect us from the deadly virus, then why isn't a college-educated professional able to open their office as an accountant or as a lawyer or whatever? Why isn't the business owner who's an entrepreneur, who's figured out how to build a successful business for years, why isn't he entrusted to run his business well when we're letting the minimum wage employees at the largest chains in our country work every day? It boggles my mind. So I feel like there's a way to set guidelines, and this is what we tried to do in New York, right? Establish guidelines and protocols that make sense, that are reasonable, that mitigate real risk, and then let everyone apply them equally. So if the church wants to reopen with social distancing and with face covers and with good hygiene, with sanitation and with reduced duration, let them open. If theaters want to run, reduced capacity, sanitation, face covers, and maybe, run an intermission, right? Obviously, like drive-ins are going to be a thing again. That's great. I hope we get to restaurants with the girls on the skates, the girls in the skirts with the skates. I'd love to see that. Strong legs, happy people eating food. Let's do that.
Yeah, the drive-ins are actually making a comeback apparently around the country, which is kind of cool. I wanted to get back into your class. I just wanted to set up a little bit of what you're thinking of the whole coronavirus is before you get into the actual class. A couple questions. Was New York picked on purpose as the first place because of the restrictions?
No, it was picked because it's the epicenter of the virus. So if the governor had said, hey, gun shops can reopen, great. It might not have had the sort of mystique or the edginess of civil disobedience, but I think it was still incredibly important that if I was going to claim that I'm offering something to the training community, or I'm doing something of note, that what I'm doing is trying to help establish protocols for training on indoor ranges while people are concerned about the virus, or for people that are concerned about the virus. We're trying to set an example that can be emulated across the country. So if I do that in, like the middle of Montana, where the counties had one case of coronavirus and nobody's been hospitalized, it's like, so what? So I want to do it at the epicenter, right? That's the place to go to find the experts. First of all, I have a few friends there that are in the medical community, and several friends in the emergency response community there who've been dealing with this. They've lost friends, they've lost staff members, they've lost patients for those who are medical practitioners. Some of these medical practitioners have had the virus and had the fever and gone through that and recovered. So it was really important to me to involve people who really knew what they were talking about, people who were sort of unquestionable, people that really, if you're going to throw a flag and say, well, that's crazy talk. Well, you're not just throwing it at Rob, like making stuff up in his basement. You're throwing that flag saying it's crazy talk to you probably like from the middle of nowhere in Montana. You're throwing a flag against the guy who's been fighting coronavirus at its epicenter in the United States, in the middle of New York City. And, that's a tall hill to climb if you're really going to question what we're doing. Ultimately, I look at it this way. We're 8 days since the class. It is entirely possible, and less so now, but like I did an interview on Monday, and I said, we're 3 days from the class. It is entirely possible that everybody in that class got coronavirus at that class from one or two people that might have been carriers, that one or three of us are going to get very sick, and that maybe one of our extended, no one in the group was high risk, but maybe one of our extended family members or something could end up dying. And I liken it to bringing a gun. I'm obviously everybody, it's kind of the running joke. When is my gun from Avidity Arms finally going to make it to market? When it makes it to market, I have to know that one of those guns could kill a kid. One of those guns could kill a cop. One of those guns could fail mechanically and hurt somebody. And if I'm not okay with that, if I don't believe that there's a greater good being served that comes with those risks, then I should never put a gun on the market. Like if somebody works in a gun shop and they haven't accepted the fact that they could sell a gun that kills a kid or a cop, go work at Walmart. Get out of the gun shop, because you could get that phone call one day, and it's something we need to be really serious about. So in running this class, I need to be able to run this class not just as a PR stunt, but run it in a way that I can put my head on the pillow, and I usually fall asleep on the couch. I can fall asleep on the couch. I can go in the bedroom, put my head on the pillow, and I can wake up the next morning. And if I get that call, I still know that we did everything. If we were going to run a class on an indoor range in New York City, we did it the best way we could with the input from people who really know what they're talking about at literally the highest level.
How long did it take you to come up with the protocols?
So I started talking about this because I've been talking to these people in New York and in other places, Italy, Germany, people that work for the UN, people that work for Health and Human Services in the US, people that work in hospitals around the US. I've been talking to these people all along. So I was already starting to hypothesize, like here's some things we could do. If you want to open your indoor range, if you want to run a class, indoor, outdoor, here's some things we could do. But it was sort of all theory. And I felt, the longer this went on, the more I felt I was self-conscious. And nobody really, it's kind of surprising in our community. Like I wasn't really being attacked, but I did have friends and would you do it that way? And it was a little bit of a challenge, a little bit of a sincere question. I was starting to feel self-conscious about the fact that I wasn't running courses and I wasn't really walking the walk on this, right? So I really doubled down probably about 2 weeks before the course. First of all, I reached out to the medical professionals and said, is this even viable? Like, I keep talking about responsible rebellion and maybe it's time to move forward and open, or I think it is time to move forward and open our businesses and get back to life. What do you think? And universally, I got support for that idea. Then it was a question of how. And obviously a lot of different experts, a lot of different opinions, people are going to vary on what they recommend and how they recommend to do it. And a lot of people just said, well, just run outdoor classes. Well, running outdoor classes is fine. And I get that that's a lot easier, but what about indoor classes? Well, you would need this, but the advantage is there's a lot of air circulation. So there's a lot of moving air. And it's not really, like in your article, you talked about the filtration. Remember, it's not as much about the filtration of the air, because when you deal with a gun range, the filters are dealing with the air that's going out into the world, right? That air gets sucked in and brought. It's not like it's recirculating on any modern gun range. The air is coming in and the air goes through the filters to keep the heavy metals from going out into the environment. So I could, if somebody's in my class, to be fair, like I'm not worried about the coronavirus leaving the range. I'm worried about what's happening on the range. So the key issue for indoor ranges being safer than a classroom, for example, is that the air is moving and changing so much, so fast, right? So the air moving in a consistent, predictable direction past the students and taking the air and the coronas right out through those filters. Whether they get trapped by the filters or not, it's kind of irrelevant. The fact that it's moving through that space and getting out of the way, that's what's most important. And that's why, for example, we didn't really have any classroom time in these 2 sessions. Because why would I take people when I can put them on a range where the air is moving so much, or I can sit them in a classroom It's a little noisier on the range. I get it, right? But I'd rather be on the range where the air is moving than sitting in a classroom where the air isn't moving, except for whatever the normal air conditioning is. So that's really important from an indoor range standpoint. A lot of doctors and other people brought that up. So the base question, how long ahead of time? 2 weeks, I started talking to the medical professionals and what their thoughts were. And it was about a week before the class that I reached out to Pioneer and I asked them, would you guys be interested? And at that point, they thought they might actually be allowed to legally open on May 15th. And that's when we said, okay, let's do the class on May 15th. It'll be a celebration of the fact that we can open. And if they push us back, we'll figure it out. And within a day or two, we knew that wasn't going to be a legally opening date. And again, much credit to the owners. They said, we're going to do it anyway. And they were really the ones taking the biggest risk here because they were the ones that stood to get fined, to get shut down, to get their licenses, their occupancy license or their business licenses pulled. At the end of the day, the students and I really, there wasn't much jeopardy. I didn't expect the police to show up and arrest people or any of that kind of stuff. What we expected was a strongly worded letter maybe coming to the range, and that might have included fines and or other sanctions. They were really the ones being brave, I think.
What are some of the protocols?
So the number one thing is reduced density, right? Reduced capacity for the range. So limiting the number of people on there. So we went with 50%, pretty easy on that range. I would normally have 8 to 10 students. We had 4 students in one session, 5 in the other. So we limited the number of students in the class. The second thing we did, which again to me is pretty obvious, is we reduced the duration of the class. So I generally don't run half-day classes. Usually I run multi-day classes, a lot of one-day classes during the tour, my busiest time of year. So we ran 4-hour sessions. We did 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon. And during each one of those sessions, we limited the number of people. So limited duration, limited class density, reduced class size. And then we've had mandatory face covers for everyone participating and optional gloves. I wore gloves because I obviously am going to be touching students. I'm going to be touching all the targets. I'm going to be kind of touching everything. So I wore gloves, and the protocol was if I took a student's gun to demonstrate something or if I touched a student to adjust something, that I would just remove those gloves, trash them, use some hand sanitizer, and put on new gloves. So and then the students also used hand sanitizer. Every time we took a reload break, either at the beginning of the reload break or after the reload break, they would use hand sanitizer. And obviously the students were at separate spaces. They were all separated by about 8 feet, maybe 10 at their loading stations. So each one of them had a separate area for their gear. They weren't sharing gear. There was one situation in the afternoon class. We had a female student, and I actually made a post about this like 5-6 weeks ago about how chivalry is being killed by the coronavirus faster than people are because you can't hold doors open for women. If a woman dropped something, I almost threw my back out, starting to reach for it and then stopping because I didn't want to offend her, fear of corona, right? Like I'm not supposed to touch what she just dropped because now I'm putting my coronavirus on it, that kind of thing. So we had a female student in the second class, the second session, and she had a magazine that ended up in front of one of the male students, and he went to pick it up for her. And as soon as he picked it up for her, okay, boom, now you've just cross-contaminated. So now more hand sanitizer and sanitize the magazine and like that. So you have to be aware of those kinds of little things, which might seem silly, but at the end of the day, if you're going to do this, you're going to say that you're doing everything you can to reduce the likelihood of transmission, then you have to follow through. So if my glove touches one student's gun and I may correct another student or grab their gun later, then I need to burn those gloves, or alternatively use a lot of hand sanitizer. But it made more sense to me to go ahead and burn the gloves. Those were the big highlights. The mandatory face covers, the reduced duration, reduced class size, and hand sanitizer as appropriate. Instructor with gloves on. I've heard a lot of people say, well, I can just teach class from 20 feet away. I can talk through a bullhorn or use the PA system or whatever. I don't have to be near the students. And that's true for an advanced class, but that is not true for a beginner class. For beginners, any instructor worth their salt knows that if someone's picking a gun up for the first time, the best place, the most important place for you to be is within arm's reach. So that if they start to turn or they start to look at the gun or whatever it is that they start to do, you can get control over them. I feel it would be negligent for an instructor, like at the concealed carry class level or the NRA basic pistol class level, it would be literally negligent of them to stand 20 feet away and just phone it in, you know?
Yeah, I agree. GOF spread the coronavirus faster than those other calibers.
Sorry, I missed what you said there.
It said GOF said that that 9mm spread the coronavirus faster than other calibers.
well, they do. If the coronavirus is on it, it moves a lot faster than that old slow 45. That's for sure. I'm sorry. I just saw something come across. Lieutenant Colonel Alan West has been put in the hospital. Apparently, he was just whacked by a driver while he was on his motorcycle.
Oh wow!
Yeah, I just saw that. It came across the corner of the screen as a text message, and I just looked at my phone. So best wishes to Lieutenant Colonel West. Hopefully that works out. Apparently, he was heloed to a hospital, but he's stable.
He's a good guy.
Yeah, no, he's good. He was, it's funny. He was very outspoken about all the problems. I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent, but he was very outspoken about the problems at the NRA early on, and then he's just sort of, refused to get involved over the last several months. But very good guy, and hopefully he's okay and he makes a quick recovery there.
I hope so too. He will be in my prayers. With your classes, did you require a updated waiver that included words about, hey, if you get COVID-19, don't sue me, or anything like that?
I barely pay any attention to the waiver as it is. The way as I travel around, I have students sign the waiver for the ranges that I teach at. I don't have a special waiver. I don't put much stock in them. You showed up to a class, you know what you're getting into. I give a very thorough brief that is witnessed by everybody there. I've got thousands of students that have heard the same briefing, the same warning. They know that I'm very upfront about the fact that you're probably in more danger of getting shot taking a 2-day class on the range than you are doing anything else you might be doing during those 2 days. Just knowing what we know about the training environment, things like that. I'm 19 years into a training career full time since I left law enforcement, and I haven't had any students shot or shoot each other or shoot themselves on the range yet. I don't know anybody else who's done it this long and this often that's made that happen. I sort of mentally, knock on wood every time I say that over the last few years. But if somebody got corona last week and they tried to sue me, good luck. My most recent ex took most of my stuff anyway. It's probably not going to work out well for you.
Well, that's a little bit of information that I wouldn't have been expecting. Okay. So we touched on all that stuff. I also wanted to touch on something else that you are involved in, and that is basically the 2A rally. What happened last October is going to happen this October again.
It is. You're right. I'm gonna give me a pause for a second. Why don't you, if you could just share with the audience for like 30 seconds your impression, because you were very closely involved in talking to a lot of the people involved last year. I'm just gonna deal with this win situation. I'll be right back.
Yeah, no problem. The 2A event last year is where I met Mr. G Webbs, in fact. But 2A event was held on the grounds of the U.S. Capitol, and there were speakers from all around the country and people from all around the country. It was done on a short notice. It was really successful for a short notice, and also the fact that the Nationals had their victory parade, Go Nats, on the same day as the 2A event. So it kind of like backed up the Metro, which is our subway system in the DC area. And also other things played into maybe not having the turnout it would have had. But the turnout was great. It had 1,000 people, and it was really successful. Rob was one of the people that was one of the faces. You and Jeff Knox not Jeff Knox. Jeff Knox were probably the two faces of the 2A rally, and it's going to happen again this year. Originally, it was said it was going to be a one-time thing, but now it's the happening again. Why was there a change from a one-time event to a second year now?
I think that there was a few things. First of all, it was short notice, but it wasn't short notice by any design or by any mistake. It was short notice because it was short notice. A group of guys got together and said, this would be a great idea. How fast can we pull it off? Should we try to pull it off? The gun community doesn't do rallies. That's what we were being told by a lot of people. And obviously we do rallies now. And we certainly think that the 2A rally in DC had a lot to do with the rallies we've seen in Arizona, certainly the rally in Virginia. We definitely bucked the trend and went up against some of the establishment in the gun community leadership by saying we wanted to do a rally. That played into it too, right? The idea was we didn't want to give people 6 months. I don't think we would have benefited last year from giving people 6 months to second guess what we were doing or how we were doing it. So in a lot of ways, it played out perfectly. I mean, and the weather was perfect. Forget about the Nats parade. I know you were really excited about that victory for the Nats, but at the end of the day, it could not have worked out any better in a lot of ways. And it did come together very fast. We were talking about it in August. We secured the permits in September, and we really went public about the time of the Gun Rights Policy Conference at the end of September was when we really started recruiting and confirming speakers, we being Jeff Knox and I. It was a committee of 5 people, 6 people loosely, but 5 people really were involved start to finish. And Jeff Knox and I, originally the idea was, we wanted to be anonymous. So there were no sponsors, there was no sponsoring company, there was no sponsoring organization, but like anonymous only works to a certain extent, right? Like eventually somebody has to come out and tell people what's going on, and somebody has to go recruit speakers, and somebody has to talk to the press and this and that. So Jeff Knox and I did that. And now moving forward, obviously I'm involved. I'm involved in putting it together and in recruiting the financial sponsors, but still it's going to be the same thing where there will be no organization that is the headliner or sponsor organization. There will be no company banners up there. There are companies and private individuals who are donating money out of their own pocket at their own expense because they believe in the Second Amendment. They believe the rally is valuable, but no one's sort of getting credit for that, right? So on the one hand, am I proud of what we did? Absolutely. On the second hand, I don't want this to be seen as like Rob's rally, and nor does Rob deserve, all the credit for any of it. There's a group of people and many supporters who are making sure that this happens. So the mantra of no sponsors, anonymous committee, no point other than supporting the Second Amendment and our right to exercise our gun rights under the protection of the Second Amendment responsibly, and that we're just interested in making this happen. All of those things were incredibly important last year. It became obvious to me and to several others, even before the November 2nd rally last year, that there was enough momentum and enough interest, and that if we could pull it off, it was certainly worth doing again and making it an annual event, as long as we could keep true to the no sponsors, no organization, mantra. And that's what we're doing. So it was definitely a pivot. There was no greater good being served by it only happening once, but there was a great deal of good being served by we're only going to prove that it can be done right now. We're not worried about next year. Because one of the things that came up many, many times in the weeks leading up to it was people would say to us, well, you know what, if you just postpone it and do it next year, you might have 20,000 people instead of 2,000 people, or 30,000 people instead of 3,000 people, because so many people complained that it was short notice. And all of us just kind of put our heads down and said, nope, we're doing it. We're pushing forward. It's going to be what it's going to be. If we can do it well enough, that'll prove that it can be done, and we'll see what happens next year. So sort of like now, there's a lot of pressure on every person, and thousands of people did this. Thousands of people said, well, if I'd have known further in advance, I'd have been there. Well, we're going to see. because now you know. We actually announced the date back in December or January when I secured the permits, October 24th. And now 5 months out, we're really starting to push to remind people this is really happening. We're going to start announcing speakers. We are very open to any company or individual that wants to put in, a 4-figure number. We've got about a $25,000 to $30,000 expense to all in that we've got to cover. Nobody's making any money. The speakers don't get paid. Everybody's got to get themselves there. But just to have the facility, have the stage and the speakers and everything we need to do, the speakers being the PA system, we need some money. So it'll be very interesting to see how many people show up this year. And especially, and if you're listening to this and you were one of the people last year that said you didn't have enough notice, you've got plenty of notice this year. I hope you show up and I hope you bring friends.
A question from the audience. How do you re-spark the energy from the first one? Are there still fumes, or do you guys have to start from scratch to build momentum, or can you build off the momentum from the year?
I think that, again, I think that there is power in urgency. So there was a question back in December when we secured the permits and we knew this was going to happen again. Do we, how hard do we push for an event that's 11 months or 10 months away? I tend to think, and obviously like with coronavirus, I think that people get distracted, right? People are going to tell you what people tell you in January about what they're going to do in October means nothing. And the only people that doesn't count for is the people that are putting up cash. So if somebody wants to write a check to us in January and say, here's $5,000 for your event you're going to have in October, well, that happened in January. The money went into the bank, and it helps us in October. Everybody else, all bets are off. So with the, and maybe that's a little bit cynical, but even speakers, like if I ask somebody in January if you're going to speak in October and they say, yeah, I'd love to, personally, I don't even hold them to it. I'm just now reaching out and reconfirming with a lot of the speakers over the last month. I started a month ago, and some of the other people that are helping plan this started in April saying, hey guys, we're 6 months out. Are you still interested in speaking? And every one of them is confirmed. Thankfully, as soon as we made the announcement last week to remind everybody that we're 5 months out and the event is going, we made some social media posts. There's been a lot of great feedback. There's been a lot of sharing. So to that extent, I think, yeah, that's definitely like fumes are there, and we're definitely lighting a spark. But I don't really think that becomes a fire until August. So for all the people last year that said we didn't plan far enough in advance, we announced this date a long time ago. I don't know how many people have already scheduled the weekend of October 24th off. I don't know how many people have booked hotel rooms. If there's 1,000 of them out there, thank you. But I don't think we need that. I think it's still going to be a last minute thing for a lot of people. And obviously right now, one of the big variables is coronavirus. I mean, who knows, if there's a second wave, if, there's an overlap with flu season and October doesn't work. I mean, who knows? We're also going to have a very contentious election this year. That's going to be distracting a lot of people. We'll see. We're going to start announcing the speakers. And obviously, just like last year, I would expect that the speakers are going to be a big, big part in recruiting attendees, right? It's not just the fact that there's a rally in DC. It's certainly not the fact that Rob Pincus is going to be involved in a rally in DC. It's going to be the 30 speakers recruiting their audiences and their followers and all the people that they can influence, and their friends and their friends. This is a grassroots event, right? That's one of the beauties of having it not sponsored or headlined by any organization or by any company, is this really is a rally, for the people and by the people of the Second Amendment community.
Okay. I only got a couple more questions for you. Is it going to be the same speakers, or is it going to be changed up a little bit? It's
going to be changed up. My estimate would be that it's going to be somewhere between 40 and 60% the same speakers, and the other half will be new speakers. And if anything, I would say it'll be closer to the 40% than the 60%, the way things are playing out. I think it's really important that we diversify the message. Gun Rights Policy Conference is sort of the model for quality speakers that really know their topic with a very, very diverse speaking group. And the way GRPC runs, they had 90 speakers, I think, last year. We don't have room or time for 90 speakers. I think the biggest difference between gun rights policy conference speakers and what I'm looking for at the 2A rally would be the engagement of the non-gun community person. GRPC is really sort of an insider thing. It's all of us educating and sharing ideas and updating and news and inspiration and motivation and collaboration and all that. Whereas I think the DC rally is something that can speak to people who are outside of our community. So that would be the one, big difference. Last year we had a lot of overlap. My guess would be that, probably 75 or 80% of the speakers at the 2A rally had been speakers or been involved one way or another at Gun Rights Policy Conference.
Okay. Another thing, are all the same people involved in the planning, like Jeff Knox, for example?
Every single person that was involved last year has certainly been consulted and is involved in the conversations. Much like I've alluded to, this idea that it's not going to be real until it gets closer. There are some new people who committed to being involved in the planning and in the committee, in the recruiting of supporters, in the recruiting of speakers, who have doubled down and said, yeah, absolutely, in the last few weeks and couple of months, and said they're absolutely going to be involved. But the kind of real work on that isn't going to hit until June, July, probably even into August. So it remains to be seen. There will be some new blood on the committee, and I would expect 4 out of 5, if not all 5, the people that were on the committee last year will be there again this year.
All right. And final question. How can people find you and follow you online?
And if you're watching this, you know how the internet works. My name is Rob Pincus, Pincus. And you can find me. Twitter and Instagram is @PincusRob. On Facebook, it's /Rob Pincus Pro for the obviously professional stuff, all the training stuff, all the advocacy. Second Amendment organization, 2AO.org. Walk the Talk America is another organization I sit on the board of that dealing with mental health issues inside of the gun community, WTTA.org.
Great,
and,
great organization.
Yeah, is very proud of that.
And also you guys are working on a pistol together. We didn't get to that, but
we are. There's no news there. We'll have more news on that later, but that's it. If you're interested in the training stuff, personaldefensenetwork.com. And I have been sharing information about these protocols, the course in New York. I'm sure I'm going to be sharing, obviously, this video, as well as probably an excerpt or two from this video will be posted on my social media. So be sure to share that information. And again, John, thank you for everything you do. Again, you're one of the true journalists in this community, and I appreciate the work and effort that you put into putting out good, informative, and educational content.
Thanks, man. That means a lot. All right, Rob, thank you so much for coming on. And I want to thank everyone out there for watching. I am going to take my sore old ass to bed. My wife I woke up this morning thinking I was just going to go for a hike or something. And my wife had a honey-do list that broke me. It was all outside stuff to do. Oh, and I also wanted to shout out Tent FX in Vienna, Virginia. If you want to get your windows tinted, that's the place to go. Not only because they do awesome work at great prices, but they're also very, very 2A friendly. And they're openly 2A friendly, which is kind of you don't really see that a lot. And other than gun world, so we got to support the 2A businesses that we have.
That's actually the beginning of the Second Amendment organization was in the wake of Sandy Hook, when a lot of companies were banning guns. 2AO actually started as an organization to support companies that were supporting gun rights, responsibly armed Americans. So that's really our roots, going back 7 years ago. So that's definitely important to support those companies. Good shout out.
Yeah, so I wanted to shout them out specifically because they're unapologetically 2A friendly, which is not common in a lot of places. A lot of places they'll tell you under the table, hey, we like guns.
Right.
But they don't have like an anti-gun policy. Like if you're unemployed and you want to carry, go right ahead.
Bring it.
And they do awesome work too. All right, Rob. I will see you guys later, and I'll see everyone out there on the webs. Check me out at Real John Crump on Facebook and Instagram, CrumpySS on Twitter. And if you're watching this on any other platform other than YouTube, you can always check out my YouTube at John Crump 2 on YouTube. That's where I'm trying to push everyone to. I know most of the people watch through Facebook and other platforms, but I'm trying to push everyone to YouTube. All right, guys. You guys have a great Sunday. Enjoy your barbecues on Monday if you're having barbecues, whatever. It's kind of weird saying Happy Memorial Day, but keep in mind those who have sacrificed for us on this Memorial Day. And with that, I am going to say goodbye.
You've been watching Fireside Chats with John Crump, a Black Swan Media Group production. Like, comment, share, and subscribe. Tune in every week for a conversation with the difference makers in the world.